if you're doing it in person. So thanks very much, Ellie, for that introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. To be honest, I'm not somebody who's ever viewed myself as a natural presenter at all. So I was surprised when John Jones, my doctoral student, invited me to give this, talk on delivering conference presentations. And I did stick to the brief where he suggested one slide, 5 minutes. I might go a bit more than 5 minutes if there's a little bit of leeway with time. But I did try to cram everything onto one slide. So I'll talk you through my thoughts on this. So basically, at this stage, you followed all of Tinika's excellent tips on abstract writing, and you've got that conference presentation in the bag, and you're trying to figure out what goes in and how to prepare it, how to present it. I mean, I really, through my career, have gone through an evolution on how I deliver conference presentations. I remember my first presentation as a graduate student, I was extremely nervous, and I sort of scripted things and like typed in notes at the bottoms of slide, and then would print out all of these pages that I take up and look at. But I had a difficulty doing that while trying to multitask and looking at knowing where to look in terms of seeing the slides and then flipping through notes and then clicking. I found that really difficult. So after time and when I became a little bit more confident, I actually ditched the paper notes. They work for some people, but I found it quite difficult to switch between things. And I think the second mode that I went through was one where I would rehearse and practice a lot, sometimes just to myself, to try to boost my own fluency. I think that was the most successful way of delivering a conference presentation, because even if I was sleep deprived, I could kind of do it, and the key vocabulary would come more quickly for me than if I hadn't rehearsed. Lately, I've become lazier and I have sort of less time before needing to deliver presentations. So I just kind of wing it, and that doesn't always work that well. But just to say that people have different styles and ways of preparing presentations. I mean, I know some extremely good and natural presenters who do script every single thing that they say. They like that degree of control, but they are so natural in reading it out. They script their jokes, maybe they script their pauses, I don't know. But it comes across very, very natural. But I haven't seen that for too many presenters. So it's quite rare where you see scripting and you wouldn't know that it wasn't spontaneous. I think if you're able to do that, then you're very good at delivering scripted presentations. I've never been able to do that particularly. So, it's nice to be able, I think, to be spontaneous if you can, but it does take some preparation. And, so we'll just talk through a few things that came to my mind when I was pulling this slide together. So basically, when you're giving a conference presentation, you're telling a story. Right, so you're talking about your probably your research, and you need to keep in mind who the audience is. Tinika referred a little bit to this. Remember, the reviewers for your abstract don't know your study. Well, in the context of conference presentations, that's also the case. People in the audience will not know your study, but you have to keep in mind sort of who you're delivering it for and what you can assume that they know about. For example, I've got a doctoral student here, Shishi Zhang, whose research area is pragmatic assessment, okay? And she may be presenting to an assessment audience who know a lot about assessment, but not so much about pragmatics. So in the context of that audience, she might want to elaborate specifics to do with pragmatics that many people in the audience wouldn't know. Where if she was presenting to a pragmatic audience who don't know much about assessment, you couldn't take for granted that they would know basic principles of assessment. So she would need to, in that case, tailor her presentation to that particular audience, not taking for granted any prior knowledge of assessment related concepts. Okay. If you're presenting at a general conference, people might not know who Bachman and Palmer are, for example. You couldn't take for granted that people understand what validity is. I mean, I think there are lots of different definitions of validity, of course, but you need to keep in mind who is the audience that I'm presenting presenting to? What can I assume that they already know, and what do I need to elaborate? So you can actually be presenting on the same content, um, but put a different spin on things depending on which audience you're presenting for. Now, if you're always presenting for language testing audience, then your job is easier, but you might decide that you want to repackage your talk and present for a task-based language teaching audience or something, or a psycholinguistic audience. So you need to sort of keep that in mind. Keep in mind what their interests are, and the slant for your presentation. I think the abstract is where you conceptualize that, but certainly it comes, you kind of, when you write an abstract, you sort of have an idea of what it is that you want to deliver. And then, oh boy, I got it accepted. How am I going to operationalize that in the context of a presentation? And so it's important that you use the abstract as a guide. It's not a contract, but it certainly should guide you in what you're going to deliver, and then tailoring it for that audience is very important. Um, if you're delivering a research presentation, so a presentation on any kind of empirical study, there will be some kind of formulaic nature to what you need to present, okay? Just like if you were writing a journal article. Um, Overall, you follow a structure. The audience will expect that structure, right? Where you give an introduction to generate interest in the topic and maybe a broader perspective. Then you move on to the lit review to provide some key background, show how those studies that you're citing, contribute to knowledge, but that there's some kind of research gap that you're going to try to fill in your study, research aims, research questions. You know how it goes, right? Through to, the procedure method section where you present a research design. It's all a formula, right? You talk about systematically about how you went about conducting your study, all the way through to the presentation of the findings and then the discussion section. So the audience is going to expect that you present according to that kind of formula, regardless of where your study is in the research paradigm. So it might be a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method study, and overall you would expect a roughly similar structure. And to clue you into what that structure might look like, if you go to any kind of sort of research methods textbook, you can see sort of main headings that you would use in writing up your research, and it's very similar. So it's a parallel kind of thing for conference presentations. So make sure that you clue into that formula and get the macro level or organization of your talk right, giving the audience what they expect in a way that they can understand. Okay. Um, Crucially, also, remember that at conferences, people have, I mean, their heads get really saturated, right? You get inundated with a lot of information, and it's great, but you get tired. People do get tired. I mean, similarly, when you're delivering presentations online, I mean, there is sort of screen fatigue, and so we need to do what we can to make things easy for people to grasp. Right? We don't want a dense sort of presentation where we expect people to tie the logic together. No, we want to take the audience by the hand and help them understand what it is you're trying to show in your study, and ponder things so that they can ask meaningful questions at the end of the presentation. So in order to do that, I mean, you need to, as I said, tell a coherent story basically, but also try to make your slides as accessible as possible. You don't want to increase people's eye strain. You want to help make the slides more readable. And this is for everybody, but particularly for people who have some kind of visual difficulties. I'm very nearsighted myself and very, very sensitive to the visual display of slides. In fact, I was giving feedback. I saw a dry run of a Messick lecture in the past. This is the top presentation, one of the top awards given at the Language Testing Research Colloquium. It's a prize that's a big honor. And I still, when I saw the dry run, gave feedback on accessibility of the slides. And it's really important. And in the context of that presentation, it was a fantastic presentation, but I couldn't, I saw it online and I had to just close my eyes because I couldn't stand looking at the screen. It just gave me so much visual difficulty. I was straining and it was too difficult for me. So I closed my eyes and listened to the presentation. But it was such a shame because the visual support could have enhanced the presentation, and I just couldn't look at it because the color contrasts were bad. So make sure that you are using very good color contrasts. For example, you don't want sort of a light font against a light background because that will be much harder for people to read. Okay, make sure that you do that. I would say cut excess verbiage, only put on there the essential words. Okay, so you don't need to write prose. Get rid of any sort of wordiness as much as you can because it will make the slide easier to read. Okay. I would recommend using 24-point font minimum for any essential information. I like fonts like Tahoma. That's what I've used here. It's a really good font, but just be aware that there are some fonts that are better to use than others for helping people be able to read it easily. I could say that you could go down to 20-point font for unessential information. For example, for referencing, 20-point font is fine. But do be mindful that you need to try to help your audience help make it easy for them to follow your talk and to be able to see what's on those slides, because the visual input on the slides should be complementing and enhancing, coinciding with what you are saying orally. Okay. Another point to do with that is, where possible, don't read out your slide verbatim. Okay. So you may have stuff written on your slide, and we all slip into sort of reading out those points out loud. Generally, it's not a good idea if you can avoid it, because people can, hopefully, if you follow these tips, see the information, and so you can kind of paraphrase that. But also, I've seen quite a few, very good speakers, international students or people giving job talks even, who are delivering very clear presentations, and then all of a sudden they read out a point on a slide, and they just become a lot more difficult to understand, just because of the nature of reading aloud, and so I would suggest, where possible, try to keep things interesting for the audience and try to avoid reading from the slides. Now, these are rules of thumb, and I always break these myself. So they're just some general tips. Okay. Um, some pictures and diagrams really can be easier to absorb than detailed tables. Again, just put in there what you need to, but it can be nice to sort of use a picture, to emphasize a point sometimes, have some kind of figure that you just paste in there with colors or something. Make sure, if you're using a figure, that the legend is legible so people can see what that represents. Okay, if you're using a picture, try to have them be unambiguous. Obviously, I'm also increasingly aware of copyright issues. So if it's not your own your own image, try to go for a Creative Commons license where it's a CC BY license. Look at that information. If you look at Google Images, you can do a search for Creative Commons licenses, and then it will tell you, once you pick an image, whether you need to put the attribution on the slide itself or not. In the case of the image I found here, it's a general image where you don't need attribution, and you're complying with copyright. That's a minor point, but I think that for the most professional presentations, we do keep in mind copyright, including for images. So, if you're using somebody else's image and you need to attribute it, just do so with a small link. And if you do that, that can be a very small font indeed. You don't need to use 20-point font for an attribution on a slide. Okay, that's sort of unessential information. I find that dry runs can be very helpful. They can help with the delivery of the presentation. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm somebody who often struggles to find the right vocabulary words when I present, especially if I'm tired or sleep deprived. My processing is a little bit slower, and if I'm presenting technical information, the retrieval sometimes is quite slow the first time that I deliver it. And I find that if I do have time to do a dry run or even a self rehearsal where I sort of do the presentation to myself in a whisper voice, but I do go over it and I do time it. That really helps with the polish and the delivery. And I tend to speed up the subsequent times, but not, not too much, but just so that there's a better flow to the actual presentation. I find dry runs are very helpful. We try to do that with students. Um, where you can give feedback on things, decide where to cut. Of course, you've got time restrictions with presentations. So that's something that can be really helpful, and just sort of giving you confidence and making sure that things are sort of laid out in a logical way that, the audience can understand. And also, if you are speaking to a different audience, if you can get somebody from that audience to give you feedback as part of your dry run, then that's very helpful. For example, I did give feedback to an SLA researcher recently who was presenting to a language testing audience, where I said, I don't think language testers will know what that is. And the SLA people were really surprised. But actually, I think it was quite valuable feedback, because the language testing audience might have missed something fundamental to the talk if I hadn't given that feedback. Okay. Um, I mean, people do get presented, get nervous presenting. I think that's very natural. I mean, often the adrenaline can work in our favor. I always take, water up with me. It's a bit of a crutch. It just sometimes, your throat gets a bit dry, and water doesn't always save everything, but it's good to have on hand. But just remember, when you're presenting, the audience is giving you the benefit of the doubt. Generally speaking, audiences are, they want to see you do well, and they probably don't know as much about your research, all aspects of your research, as you do, and they hopefully will helpfully point things out in the Q&As, and I know Linda will talk about that in a minute. But enjoy it. I mean, the presentation goes by so quickly. I mean, we have a build up and, oh my God, now we're presenting, and then you do it and then it's over and you think, gee, I was starting to enjoy that. It's your time to shine, to blossom, to share what you've learned, and to seek input from the audience. So of course we can be nervous. Keep in mind that you're sharing and disseminating, and that's very valuable. And so do, take that opportunity and enjoy it as much as you can, because you've earned it if you get a presentation opportunity. And I think I've gone well over 5 minutes. Thank